Welcome back, adventurers! Today, September 11th, 2025, we're traveling way back in time. We're going to a period called the Lopingian Epoch, part of the late Permian. This was about 259 to 252 million years ago. It was a time long before the dinosaurs. Earth was a very different place. It was a single giant supercontinent called Pangaea. The rest of the planet was a massive ocean called Panthalassa. This ocean was huge, more than twice the size of our modern Pacific. The world was also incredibly hot. Imagine the hottest desert you can think of. That was the average temperature for much of the planet, around 35 degrees Celsius or 95 degrees Fahrenheit. This ancient world had a strange twist. Usually when we think of prehistoric times, we imagine terrifying monsters in the deep sea. But during the Lopingian, the opposite was true. The land was the most dangerous place to be. The oceans were actually much safer. This was because of a major extinction event that happened just before this era, called the Capetanian extinction. This event hit marine life really hard. It wiped out many of the big ocean predators, so the seas had a chance to recover, but the biggest, scariest hunters hadn't evolved back yet. On land, however, new and ferocious predators were taking over. Let's picture this world. The landmass of Pangaea created extreme climates. The coasts might have been livable, but the interior was a vast, scorching desert. It was arid and harsh. The sun beat down relentlessly on this massive continent, and the days were shorter. The Earth spun faster back then, so a day was only about 22 hours long. The moon was closer to us, causing this faster rotation. It was a truly alien environment. Life had to be tough to survive here, very tough. The plants and animals that called Pangaea home were adapted to heat and dryness in ways we can barely imagine. So you have this strange setup, a world where you'd rather take a swim than go for a walk in the woods. The oceans were a relative paradise compared to the brutal landscape of Pangaea. While the seas were calm, the land was a battleground. It was ruled by some of the most fearsome predators to ever walk the earth. These weren't dinosaurs, they were therapsids, a group of animals more closely related to us mammals than to reptiles. They were fast, powerful, and very, very hungry. This unique situation with safe seas and deadly lands makes the Lopingian one of the most fascinating chapters in our planet's history. If you were to take a dip in the Panthalassan Ocean during the Lopingian, you'd find it surprisingly peaceful. The great sea monsters were gone. The Capetanian extinction had been like a reset button for the oceans. The fearsome 8-meter-long shark, Helicoprion, with its buzzsaw jaw was extinct. The top predator spot was now empty. This allowed smaller, more specialized creatures to thrive without the constant threat of being eaten by a giant. The ecosystem was rebuilding itself from the bottom up. It was a world of survivors, not titans. The largest sharks swimming in these waters were distant relatives of the mighty Helicoprion, but they were much smaller, reaching maybe 2 meters or about 6.5 feet in length. They weren't hunting big prey. Instead, they fed on soft-bodied animals like squid. Other sharks like the sphenacanthids and hybodonts were even smaller. Most were no more than a meter long. They were like the reef sharks of their day, cruising through the warm waters. You could also find other classic ancient sea creatures like trilobites and ammonoids, but they weren't as numerous as they once were. The oceans were full of life, just not giant, terrifying life. Even the legendary sea scorpions, the Eurypterids, were past their prime. In earlier times, some of these arthropods were giants, the terror of the seas. But by the Lopingian, they were a shadow of their former selves. The surviving species were small and posed no threat to larger animals. The oceans were a sanctuary, a place where life was recovering in relative quiet. The main dangers were smaller predators hunting smaller prey. It was a complex and diverse environment, but it lacked the headline-grabbing mega-predators we often associate with prehistoric oceans. Taking a swim here would have been safer than in many oceans today. This oceanic calm stands in stark contrast to what was happening on the supercontinent Pangaea. While sea creatures were enjoying a period of relative peace, the land was heating up, both literally and figuratively. The extinction that had cleared out the oceans had also cleared the way for a new dynasty of land predators to rise. These new hunters were more advanced, more efficient, and arguably more terrifying than what had come before. The quiet of the Lopingian seas was the silence before the true storm, a terrestrial battle for survival that was raging just beyond the shore. Now let's step onto the scorching hot land of Pangaea. This place was a real-life monster movie. The top predators were a group called the Gorgonopsids. These were therapsids, or mammal-like reptiles, and they were the kings of this era. They were among the first animals on Earth to evolve saber teeth. The biggest and baddest of them all was Inostrancevia. This creature was a true nightmare. It grew up to 3.5 meters long, the size of a polar bear, and had a massive skull armed with 15-centimeter-long serrated canine teeth. It was an apex predator built for killing large prey, an ambush hunter that ruled from South Africa to the cold deserts of Russia. But Inostrancevia wasn't alone. In South Africa, another group of giant gorgonopsids, the Rubigini, evolved. These beasts, like Rubigia atrox, were just as large and powerful. They had incredibly robust skulls, built for withstanding stress. While their bite force might not have been crushing, their deeply serrated teeth worked like steak knives, slicing through flesh with deadly efficiency. Imagine two different families of saber-toothed, bear-sized predators hunting across the same landscape. The competition must have been fierce. These animals were the lions and tigers of the Permian, and everything was on their menu. And it wasn't just gorgonopsids you had to worry about. Another group of therapsid predators, the Theracephalians, were also on the prowl. One of the most common was Muscorhinus. It was about the size of a jaguar but had a head as big as a lion's, giving it an incredibly powerful bite. Then there was the giant of the group, Megawaitsia, which reached 3 meters long. Some scientists think these Theracephalians might have been venomous. Grooves in the teeth of related species suggest they could have been the first venomous four-legged animals on Earth. A bite from one of these would have been a death sentence. The danger didn't stop there. There were crocodile-like reptiles, both armored and unarmored, patrolling the rivers and lakes, and in the water, giant amphibians waited in ambush. Creatures like the 4-meter-long Uranosentrodon in South Africa and the 3-meter Melosaurus in Russia were like giant predatory salamanders. They would lie in wait for any thirsty animal that came to the water's edge. Even the herbivores had to be tough. Giant armored plant eaters like the 1-ton Scutosaurus were covered in bony plates and spikes, like a prehistoric ankylosaur, just to survive the daily onslaught of predators. On Lopingian Pangaea, every day was a fight for life. The incredible world of the Lopingian, with its safe oceans and monstrous lands, was not destined to last. Its end was sudden and catastrophic. The era concluded with the single worst mass extinction event in our planet's history. It's called the Permian-Triassic extinction, but many know it by a more dramatic name, the Great Dying. Around 252 million years ago, life on Earth was nearly wiped out completely. It was an apocalypse of unimaginable scale. About 83% of all genera on the planet vanished forever. The reign of the gorgonopsids and the peace of the Panthalassa Ocean came to a devastating end. What could cause such a disaster? The culprit was a series of colossal volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia. These weren't just mountains spewing lava. This was an area the size of Western Europe, flooding with molten rock for hundreds of thousands of years. The eruptions, known as the Siberian traps, pumped staggering amounts of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. This triggered runaway global warming. Temperatures soared to levels hotter than the hottest month in modern Death Valley. The oceans absorbed the CO2 and became acidic, dissolving the shells of marine creatures. The devastation was total. The superheated atmosphere and acidic rain destroyed forests and plant life on land. The food chains collapsed from the bottom up. As the plants died, the great herbivores like Scutosaurus starved. Without herbivores to hunt, the mighty predators like Inostrancevia soon followed. The eruptions also released chemicals that shredded the ozone layer, allowing deadly ultraviolet radiation from the sun to flood the planet's surface. On land, it was a toxic, irradiated wasteland. In the oceans, the water heated up to jacuzzi-like temperatures, and a lack of oxygen created vast dead zones. In the end, the very balance that defined the Lopingian was tragically reversed. While the oceans had been a sanctuary, they ultimately suffered even greater losses than the land ecosystems during the extinction. Life was pushed to the absolute brink of annihilation, but life is resilient. From the ashes of the Great Dying, a few hardy survivors like the burrowing herbivore Lystrosaurus would emerge to inherit a nearly empty world. Their survival paved the way for the next great chapter in Earth's history, the age of dinosaurs. The Lopingian world was gone, but its end set the stage for the rise of new giants.